The morning of February 1st, 1943 began like countless others over the war-torn skies of Europe. The hum of engines filled the air, the rhythmic heartbeat of dozens of B-17 flying fortresses cutting through the cold wind. But among them were two aircraft destined for an encounter so impossible, it would be remembered for generations. As the sun rose above the horizon, a crew prepared for another dangerous mission, unaware that this day would defy every law of physics and logic. Two massive bombers, each carrying young men barely out of their 20s, were about to meet in the clouds in a way no one could ever predict. So before we dive into this unbelievable story, take a second to like this video and subscribe, because today we uncover one of the most miraculous moments in aviation history. A moment when death and destiny met, and the sky itself seemed to stand still. To understand what made this story so extraordinary, we must first understand the legend of the aircraft itself. The Boeing B-17, known across the world as the Flying Fortress. Built for endurance, it carried 10 men, pilots, gunners, navigators, all working in perfect coordination inside a flying machine of steel, courage, and prayer. Each mission was a gamble: anti-aircraft fire, German fighters, freezing temperatures. The odds of returning home were never guaranteed, but the B-17 had a reputation. It could take massive damage and still bring its crew back. Crews loved her. She wasn't just metal and rivets, she was a guardian, a home in the sky. Yet even a fortress could be tested. And on that fateful day, two of these mighty bombers would collide in a way so unreal, it would turn a symbol of war into a symbol of divine mercy. The mission that morning was straightforward: bomb a key industrial target deep inside German territory and return to base. For the men on board, it was just another day in the endless rhythm of war. But as the formation of B-17s climbed into the frigid skies, visibility began to worsen. Thick clouds rolled in, blinding the pilots and scattering the formation. Inside each cockpit, tension rose. The roar of engines was constant, but voices over the radio crackled with static and fear. The crew couldn't see the horizon, or each other, and somewhere in that vast gray sea of clouds, two flying fortresses, one piloted by Lieutenant Clarence R. Bud Cleven, the other by Lieutenant William G. Fort, drifted closer and closer, unaware that they were on a collision course. What happened next would defy every rule of flight and every expectation of survival. Out of nowhere, a flash of silver tore through the fog. Before either pilot could react, the two massive bombers slammed into each other at nearly 300 miles per hour. The sound was deafening, metal twisting, glass shattering, engines bursting into flames. The nose of one B-17 sliced directly into the tail section of the other, locking the two aircraft together in a deadly embrace. For a split second, time froze. Both crews stared in disbelief as their world turned into chaos. Smoke, fire, and the terrifying drop of altitude that followed. Men screamed into radios, calling for help that would never come. Oxygen masks tore loose, flames licked the cabin walls, and gravity pulled them toward the earth like a fist. Two flying fortresses, now fused into one, began spiraling out of control, disappearing into the clouds below. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something no one could explain. When the clouds broke for a moment, the crews realized the unthinkable. The two bombers weren't falling apart. They were stuck together. The nose of one B-17 had wedged itself deep into the fuselage of the other, creating a grotesque flying sculpture of destruction. Against every law of aerodynamics, the tangled aircraft somehow remained in the air. Inside the upper fortress, the pilot pulled at the controls. Nothing. The yoke was frozen solid. In the lower one, the co-pilot shouted over the noise, "We're holding steady, we're still flying." It made no sense, but both aircraft were moving together. One engine dead, another smoking, yet still flying. Below them, ground troops stopped what they were doing, pointing to the sky in disbelief. Two bombers, one on top of the other, gliding through the heavens like a single wounded creature. It looked impossible, because it was. Inside the cabins, chaos reigned. Flames licked through the wreckage, smoke filled the air, and the sound of creaking metal echoed like a dying beast. Some men had already bailed out, their parachutes vanishing into the clouds below. Others clung to their stations, frozen between duty and terror. In the upper plane, the pilot fought to regain control, pulling on a lifeless yoke. His hands bled, his lungs burned from the smoke. "God, don't let us die like this," one gunner whispered through trembling lips. In the lower B-17, another voice cried out, "If we go down praying." Then something extraordinary happened. As the engine sputtered and the structure groaned, the two aircraft began to stabilize, not falling, not climbing, just floating, as if held by an invisible hand. The crews could hardly believe it. For the first time since the collision, a flicker of hope pierced the terror. Lieutenant Clarence R. Bud. Cleven knew the odds. Two planes locked together couldn't stay in the air forever. Every second that passed was a gift, but a gift that could end in flames at any moment. Smoke poured into the cockpit. Instruments were failing one by one. The crew waited for an order, any order. Finally, through the static of the intercom, Cleven's calm voice broke the panic. "Everyone, prepare to jump." But as he looked through the shattered windshield, he saw something he couldn't explain. The plane wasn't diving anymore. It was gliding, smoothly, almost guided. He hesitated. If they jumped now, the wreck could crash into a village below. If they stayed, they risked being buried alive in the metal coffin. So he made the impossible choice: stay and try to land. His co-pilot stared at him, speechless. "Sir, are you out of your mind?" Cleven just nodded. "If this is our last flight, we finish it with courage." And so began one of the most daring moments in aviation history. As the wounded aircraft drifted over the war-torn landscape, something divine seemed to take over. The tangled B-17s, fused like a single creature of steel and fire, held steady in the sky, wings trembling, engines coughing, but still aloft. Below them, soldiers stopped shooting. Even the enemy, stunned by the sight, lowered their rifles. Two bombers locked together, refusing to fall, gliding silently like a cross in the clouds. Inside, no one spoke. The pilots exchanged glances, disbelief mixed with awe. How are we still in the air?" whispered the co-pilot. No one answered. There was no explanation, only the soft hum of an engine that shouldn't still be running. Some later said it was physics. Others swore it was fate. But for the men inside those planes, it felt like something far greater. A miracle in motion, a reminder that sometimes heaven interferes in the chaos of war. And for several long, impossible minutes, death waited and never came. From the fields below, farmers, soldiers, and townspeople froze in shock. They shaded their eyes against the sunlight, pointing to what looked like a vision from another world. Two bombers, joined together, gliding as one. Reports from the ground described it as a ghost ship of the skies. Some thought it was debris falling, others thought it was a new secret weapon. But as the strange double plane continued to hold its course, the impossible became undeniable. It was still flying. Eyewitnesses swore they saw flashes of faces in the windows, terrified men trying to steer the wreck. For nearly 10 minutes, the floating wreckage drifted above Europe, engines barely alive, gravity somehow defied. And then, in the distance, one witness said something that still gives chills today. It looked like an angel was carrying it. That day, even the most hardened soldiers felt their hearts tremble. They were watching a miracle, one that no one could ever forget. With the controls nearly useless and the engines gasping their last breaths, Lieutenant Cleven and his crew faced the final challenge, getting down alive. Smoke filled the cockpit, fuel was almost gone. The intercom crackled with prayers and broken voices. They spotted an open field ahead, miles of farmland with enough space for a desperate landing. "Hold tight," Cleven shouted. "We're bringing this bird home." The two interlocked bombers descended slowly, wobbling like a wounded bird trying to reach the ground. Every second felt eternal. The crew braced for impact, metal screaming, wings snapping, glass exploding, until silence. The wreck hit the earth hard but somehow didn't explode. The flames died down, the engines went still, and from the twisted wreckage men began to crawl out, alive, coughing, crying, stunned. Two planes that should have fallen from the sky had landed as one. No one could explain how. When rescuers arrived, they couldn't believe what they saw. Two massive bombers fused together, both destroyed beyond recognition. Yet the crew was standing on the ground, alive. Every calculation, every law of flight said this should have ended in tragedy. And yet there they were, men trembling, covered in soot, eyes wide in disbelief. One mechanic who examined the wreck later said, "There was no reason that plane should have stayed in the air. None." The survivors, however, had a different answer. They spoke not of luck, but of faith. They said that in the chaos, the moment when they thought death was certain, a strange calm filled the cockpit. like someone unseen had taken control. Historians would debate it for years. Was it coincidence, skill, or divine intervention? But for those men who lived it, the truth was simple. Something greater had spared them. Decades have passed, and aviation experts still struggle to make sense of that day. How could two heavily damaged bombers, locked together, missing key control surfaces, losing fuel, stay airborne long enough to glide, level, and land? Physics says it shouldn't have been possible. Aerodynamics says they should have spun apart and disintegrated. Yet eyewitnesses, military reports, and even photographs confirm it happened, exactly as told. Some engineers tried to recreate the scenario using models and simulations, but none have managed to reproduce the same result. Every test ends the same way, a fiery crash within seconds. So, historians call it what logic cannot: the miracle of the B-17s. And though time has buried the details beneath decades of war stories, this one stands apart, because no one has ever truly explained it. Even now, pilots and veterans still whisper about that day when two flying fortresses refused to fall. As if heaven itself had decided their mission wasn't a T over yet. The story of the B-17s that flew as one spread quickly across the Allied forces. For pilots risking their lives every day, it became more than a tale of survival. It became a symbol of hope. In air bases from England to Italy, soldiers whispered about the two flying fortresses that refused to die. They said it proved something powerful, that courage, faith, and unity could overcome even the laws of nature. Photos of the wreck circulated in secret reports studied by engineers and commanders alike. But for the men who heard the story, it wasn't just about machines. It was about the unseen force that guided them when everything else failed. To this day, veterans still recall that strange miracle as a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories aren't about who shoots straighter or flies faster. They're about who refuses to give up, even when the sky itself seems to be falling. And in the heart of every pilot who ever flew a B-17, that story lives on. The legend of two planes that became one. When people look back on this story, it's easy to focus on the mechanics, the steel, the engines, the collision. But what truly mattered that day was the human spirit, and something beyond human understanding. Those young men facing death in the frozen skies didn't surrender to fear. They fought to stay calm, to pray, to hold on to one another when everything around them screamed, "This is the end." Whether you call it divine intervention, fate, or a miracle, one truth remains: courage opens the door for the impossible. And sometimes the impossible answers back. That day, the heavens seemed to reach down and cradle two broken machines, not because of luck, but perhaps to show the world that faith still matters, even in war. When all logic fails and hope fades into smoke, that's when miracles remind us we're never flying alone. If this story moved you, remember, it's not just history. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, something greater can hold our lives together when everything seems ready to fall apart. The men aboard those two B-17s didn't know they were part of a miracle. They just kept believing, kept fighting, and somehow, they lived to tell it. Maybe that is the lesson for all of us, that courage and faith can carry us through the impossible. That no matter how broken life seems, the same unseen hands that held those bombers can still hold you. So before you go, did you like, share, and subscribe? Because stories like this deserve to be remembered. And when you spread them, you remind the world that miracles don't belong to the past. They're still flying among us today.